I do love how they've handled the dialogue, which is just as good as moments like, personally, one of my favorite talk moments is, "Oh, Sokka, you're my hero." Actually, it was me. Now you can let me drown now.
Like, I was just watching the last season's episodes to get ready for this panel, and I love it when Milo goes to Mifun, "I gotta poop really bad."
The Airbender kids are just the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, that first episode, Tenzin's like, "Don't bring my mother into this!"
Don't bring my mother to this.
When I went from a contrast of the old episodes to the newer show, I was trying to see how they were going to actually delve into more questions per se. Because you've seen how you learned 3 of the elements, and with this show, you're actually seeing how you learned 4. And then you can see how there's a difference between the original show and the other one. The first show, they were searching the world. They're going from different places to different places, here, there, everywhere. In this show, you're much more centralized location. It's pretty much one big gigantic city where you can explore and see all the nuances and actually discover different places inside the city and basically the undergrowth of it as well. You see the 2 different characters. You see Aang, how he's such a nice, happy-go-lucky kid, and even though the world's trying to get to him, but he still has that little bit of a positive spirit to him. While Korra is pretty much a hard badass. And you see how pretty much she's like, "I am the greatest bender in the world, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." And you see how this character has developed due to her own training, and see how her trials and tribulations have come to shape her character in that kind of way. I'll talk about that. So, there are a lot of differences between the 2 of them, which I was looking to see how they were going to change this and how they were not going to have the same character tell the same story, and it's really interesting to see the 2 dynamics between the 2 avatars.
I think one of the best things about avatars as a general universe is no 2 characters have ever been alike. They've always been so vastly different. They've had their own motivation and their own initiative. Why, for instance, did Uncle Iroh become the man he is now that we love? Well, because he had faced his inner demons and conquered them after doing something that was so terrible that even as a general of the Fire Nation, he considered it to be a lifelong taint on his soul.
So,
I didn't get to watch much of Last Airbender. I'm working on that, but what I like is that I feel like Korra goes into more adult issues than the Last Airbender did. It goes into the politics of bending and how some non-benders really are viewed as less than benders. And I liked how they worked out how they were going to deal with that, and how the Avatar would deal with that, because the Avatar has something in common with all the benders, but nothing in common with non-benders. So it's interesting to see how Korra can try to represent non-benders when she herself is the most bender of any bender.
I like the character because also she started from a further point in her life than Aang did. Aang was frozen in an iceberg for 100 years at the age of what, 12? And she's approaching it from, I think, she's 16, 15 or 16 when we first meet her. And, I mean, she was 4 years old and she was already a badass bender doing 3 of the 4 elements.
He was thrown into the role and didn't even realize it, where she's a little kid when the series first starts, and she goes, "I'm the Avatar, and you've got to deal with it."
Yeah, she jumps in the water and goes, she does the fire, does the earth, does the water, and goes, "I'm the new Avatar, and you've got to deal with me." And she doesn't say you have to deal with it. She says, "You got to deal with me."
She's just an amazing character. Very well written.
So the story, which Elena kind of pointed to, has a lot of interesting questions, like, do the Equalists have a good point? You know, should some non-vendors be members of Republic City's council? Councilwoman?
I think that's what that problem with the equalist is what made the challenge so interesting. Because just beating a mon up wasn't going to actually fix the problem. And that was the most fascinating thing about the season.
They needed to reveal the evil that was behind it all.
Right, but just beating him up and defeating him, that's not going to do anything because there's still a group of people, and they have actually been wrong. It's just that they're going the wrong
They have
way
a
about
legitimate
it.
concern.
They do.
Right?
But the question you asked was, do they have a real issue? Yes, they do.
They do.
But in a lot of ways, it's an example of how we do things in real life. We find something that is so completely wrong in the world, and then we overcompensate for it. We go and we put laws into place. We change our traditions and everything, but we overcompensate for it, and then we create a vast number of other problems. Where the equalists did it was, they felt that because vendors are natural weapons, and they are, in any sense of the word, they are natural weaponized people. So they viewed it as, well, if they're walking around and they're these immense weapons, we need weapons, and we need to fight them, physically fight them. And that was the escalation of, it's a good theory, and it should have been handled better. And they moved forward into violence because they didn't feel they had any other way to go.
Like when they instituted the curfew, when all the fighting was happening, and after Mayfong resigned, they were going to install the curfew for non-vendors. That's an example right there that there was inequality
That's
between
racial inequality, yes.
between the two. And why couldn't it be a curfew for everybody? Because the fighting is happening amongst both sides, not just the equalists.
What I think could help this problem is I'd like to see in later seasons a non-vendor on the council.
You actually get to that. It's not a full, oh my goodness, everybody was installed as a vendor. If you go back to the flashback scene, Sokka is on the council.
Yes, he's the leader of the council.
He's
actually.
on the council, so that shows you that this was not a thing that they installed immediately, but happened transitionally over time.
Maybe. Personally, like I said, Sokka is my single favorite character, very, very closely followed by both Toph and Katara. Sorry, those are my three favorite characters out of the series. But Sokka, he's the best example of a non-vendor who was able to hold his own, because no matter what else happened to them, Sokka was there. He was Captain Boomerang, and he knew what he had to do. He took on those roles against people like, the prince and what's her name, the princess, the insane princess.
Azula.
Yes,
and
Azula.
Right.
He took on Azula at one point with nothing but his boomerang. I mean, it was pretty badass. Because she's tossing lightning bolts and he's dodging, he's throwing the boomerang around. She's getting very frustrated, of course. Yeah, he was, this great example of how a non-vendor can actually stand up to vendors. But they didn't go that route. What they did was they listened to this lunatic, for all intents and purposes, this guy who would not show you his face. And they said, he's got a point. Let's go shoot and demolish things. This is a good idea. Instead of standing up and saying, we have this great hero who led our city for years, saved our lives. He fought for us. He should be our icon of equality. Instead, they followed this guy over here who came out of nowhere, had a story that nobody could actually verify, but yet he was spouting all this vile that just brought people into it. It grabs people and it pushes them forward with this sense of, we gotta fix this problem.
I think going back to that transitional phase when I was talking about Sokka being on the council, it's one of those things where you can tell that probably a lot of people, especially a lot of non-vendors, almost had no choice but to turn to this demigod of a character because they had no other options. One of the things you're shown right at the beginning is that you're seeing the triple triads, this gang of different vendors that have been united and fractured all the time. When you think of these guys are your mafia. And when you're coming down to your mafia and you've got these guys who can intimidate you and can control these elements, and then you realize there's nobody speaking up for me. I can't go to the council, they're just like them. Who am I gonna turn to as an option to see who can I get help from? That's when you get to that point, when you're down and you're out and you can't do anything, that's when you start turning to this guy who says, I have the option, we can make sure that we are the only people, that everybody is the same. When you have that and you have no other option to turn to, that's how you end up getting into that almost fascist appeal to it.
I do
Mob
think,
psychology.
I do think that that the idea of, okay, I can't turn to you because you are a vendor as well. But by that point, the one person they might have turned to was gone.
Right.
So they didn't really have that choice. So they did what Germany did in the 20s. They turned to the one person who was promising everything they wanted, which was they wanted security, they wanted safety, they wanted to be secure in the knowledge that these guys over here who are going to demolish my building with fire and dirt won't be able to do that with no fear of being brought to justice. They don't run the streets anymore. They need to be taught that this lesson will be given to them. And I really think that was very well handled.
It's totalitarianism. It's basically populism. They didn't have like any sort of option. They didn't have any representation. And if only one person stood up and said, "I'll be your leader," then of course they would want him to be, because nobody else is going to take that risk. So they just decide, well, we have to do what he says because he wants to do what's in our best interest.
Or he promises he'll do what's in it.
Yes. So that's not the case, but.
So in the first series, so in this series, you know, we could definitely say that it's racism or it's like intellectualism or technocracy. You know, mutants versus non-mutants.
Yeah. Same thing.
The first series, was it nationalism or racism?
It was more the hero's quest. That was the trope you're looking for. It is the hero's quest. The evolution of a single individual through his own actions and the actions of those around him that goes from being I don't want to do this, I can't do this, I don't believe I can do this, but because of his training that he needs to do it. We really don't see Aang come into his own until very, very close to the end when he finally has that realization of, I can't kill him, but I can do this to stop him. And I can see to it that he never hurts another individual, even if it costs me my life. That is Aang's evolutionary moment at the very end. That is his Gwen Stacy moment. I want to use that trope.
I think I'm going to go with the nationalistic approach for that, because you start to see when you have the school section, when you're looking at when they're taught in schools, and then you have Aang's contrast of like, that wasn't what happened. There was no Air Nation Army, and you start seeing into that. Yeah, like you start seeing that, and then have you ever actually read the comic book that ties in between the two?
I've never had a chance.
There is, what it is that there's a comic book that ties in between the two. What that says is that the colonies that the Fire Nation conquered were so tied to the Fire Nation that they didn't want to go back to the Earth Kingdom. And so what this compromise ends up becoming is that this compromise of these little colonies in this little section ends up becoming the city that Korra is actually in.
Is that
Yes, that's what it is. So those colonies said, we don't want to go back to the Earth Kingdom, but we're not quite Fire Nation, so we're going to be our own little independent entity.
I actually like that.
Yeah. So what the comic book does is that it actually does deal with the problems of what happens when you have
that actually happened to England after the Second World War.
You have a totalitarian regime that's no longer there. What do you do to the folks who've actually benefited from that, but don't want to go back to what it originally was before?
It is definitely nationalism as a theme, the first one, but more so it is the hero's quest going into, I have to fight against this totalitarian regime that is intent on conquering the world. I think with Korra we're given a much more personal view of the world, where these are individuals not fighting a war, not going up against an entire empire of individuals, just they're there to stop a wrong. And she's still a teenager, and they give us much more romance on a much earlier basis now. I mean, she falls in love with this guy the second she sees him, really, and we all know that. We all figure it out. As much as we like, I'm sorry, Bolin. As much as we love him, because he's a great character, he's definitely the Sokka of this version. And you gotta love the little fire first.
He's also a little bit of a playboy too.
Yes, he is. He's known as the womanizer for everyone, but as much as you love him, you know that he's not the one she's going to end up with. You know she's going to be attracted to the firebender, because it's far more.
I love that episode though, where it deals with the two of them, and you have where Berlin catches the two of them together, and he goes off to this noodle place, bringing his sorrows away at a bowl of noodles. How they got away with that in a kids show, I have no idea.
People have gotten away
Because
with
he
a lot
didn't go
more
to a bar
shows.
and went to a noodle shop.
Doing some of the noodle hangover.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had too much wasabi.
But that brings up a good point of, it's a very dangerous line that you dance on when you're trying to balance a show or a comic book or whatever that is kid-friendly, but mature enough to keep an interest of an adult, of widening your audience. And they're doing, in my opinion, a great job of doing that. We're having content in dialogue where it's keeping it kid-friendly, but handling the issues so that adults want to watch it too. And that's important. That's important. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think they do it better than, say, Shrek. Like,
Yeah.
in a show like Shrek, okay, they have the adult jokes every once in a while, but there's not really necessarily adult content. Like, okay, it's a love story or whatever. Yeah.
And kids are more mature now, so the themes that are out there are more prevalent for them than they were probably 10 years ago, where kids wouldn't want to watch something like that. Where now, kids are involved in probably deeper issues in their own real lives, so the issues that Korra is dealing with and everyone else is tame. So it's kind of like relief for them.
One of my little girl's favorite things about the show is the fact that she fell in love with the handsome firebender.
Yeah.
So it's still, for a 10-year-old little girl, it's all about the romance.
But one of the things they don't do is treat kids like idiots.
Yeah.
I hate those kid shows that are out there that treat kids like they're retards.
Which I'm going to say this, and I'm probably going to get laughed out of the room for it, but that is one of the reasons why I'm happy to let my little girl watch My Little Pony now.
Bronies unite!
I'm not Roni, but I have a 10-year-old little girl, so I know what I'm talking about here. But they actually do treat the kids that watch the show with some respect, and they do these issues that when the adults look at it, you go, wow, they actually handled that well. The issues in Korra are on all levels is, for instance, the firebender boy, he has this hot rich girl, or he can go with the commoner firebender who just happens, waterbender, earthbender, who just happens to be the avatar. But she's still pretty, she's still fiery, and she's the central character of the show.
So, when you have a series like this where it's not that old, the original series and then the new series, but whenever you have like a long series like Doctor Who, did Han shoot first? You get those kind of did Han shoot first moments.
I still have the copy of the original series on VHS, so I have the original VHS. So there you go.
So, blood bending. Now, should energy bending be the only way to take away somebody's bending abilities, or should blood bending really?
Spirit bending, as it was this is a spiritual level thing. I am removing your ability to do any sort of bending. On the end of using the water bending / blood bending that he did, he was removing the physical ability by way of removing that from your blood, which is a much more visceral thing, I think. And to quote my little girl, you. And it's this moment where you realize, some things that the Avatar can do that no one else can do should stay the single domain of the Avatar, because usually an Avatar is born with a sense of ethics and purpose, because he has untold generations behind him of spirits that will tell him when he's screwing up.
Yep.
As we've seen in the past with Aang. And the bloodbender, the idea that a bloodbender can bend at any time other than, when he's supposed to be able to do it, but he can do it at any time, any place. That's a frightening concept, because they can make you do all kinds of things. And Katara was possibly the only one I've ever seen on the show. Before that, I believe she was the only. No, there was two of them in the original series. there was Katara and the woman that she learned from, and Katara has been the only since the beginning of the series that stood up and said, you know what, this is an evil thing and I will not do it. I refuse. I am the strongest waterbender in the world and I refuse to use this power. And I think that's a very telling moment because you see these two boys who are trying to please their father. They're trying to please their father, and because of that, they're tainted at a very early age with the idea that it's okay because you have the power to do it. They never had the real ability to stand up and go, you know what, Dad, that's a wrong thing to do. But they did eventually.
Because just remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
The eternal line has never been created by Stan Lee.
I would like to think that the aspects of bloodbending have a bit of madness to it and a bit of lunacy to it.
Well, wasn't that how Katara originally
Yeah,
did? She
and that-
fell into a crazed
you
berserker
fell
state.
into lunacy, and so being able to do this is almost like having a genetic mental illness per se passed down. And when I look at it like mechanically, being able to bloodbend and cut off somebody's bending is almost like giving a localized aneurysm.
It is essentially what it was.
This is essentially you're giving like a localized aneurysm or like a
But
niche.
there's another aspect to that. It doesn't have to be evil. There are things you could probably do with bloodbending that would cure all kinds of ills.
But you're so mad and you're so crazy about it. You
That's
don't
it,
even
right
think
there.
about
You
it.
have to
Yeah.
reach a state where you no longer care about hurting the person involved in it.
Yes.
But could you imagine somebody like Katara, who has that moral and ethical framework in place from the time she was a child onwards, that if she could do that at any time, she had that ability all the time, could she construct a framework in her mind that would say, I could do this and I could reconstruct his arm. I can't heal a stump, but with bloodbending, I could probably grow a new one for him. It would hurt like fuck. But honestly, if I lost my arm here and someone came up to me and said, all right, for weeks you're going to be in agonizing, mind-shattering pain, but you'll have your arm back. I would ask, when? I don't think that I know anyone who would not say, how long exactly, and when can we start? Because that is one of those things that it's a very visceral need to have, when you have power, to use it. And I think bloodbending is possibly, it's one of two examples in the series of having the ultimate example of your power. The other thing, of course, is lightning bending. When you can, I think is it called lightning bending or is it energy bending? I forget.
Do you mean like the one that
Azula? What
No,
Azula does.
That's like bending light.
And Euro.
Yeah.
Because that's lightning bending?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we see two different versions of that too. We see, Uncle Eero who approached it from, this is my point of spiritual enlightenment, and I couldn't do this until I had put down the sword. And we see Azula, of course, who reached it through madness. She had her epiphany, and it was completely insane. But you had Uncle Eero who approached it from an absolute spiritual moment of, I am at perfection, I am good with myself now, I have forgiven myself for these tragedies in my past, I've gotten past the death of my sons. Oh, look, I can toss lightning now.
Well, I think what it is with lightning bending is that you have to have a total focus on one thing and total clarity. It might be clarity of madness and perfection. It might be clarity of saying, I'm going to conquer the world like Ozai. It might be clarity that, like, I know that there is balance in the world and I must maintain it. That's probably the reason why Zuko can do it, because he's so conflicted.
He is, indeed, internally, he is too conflicted. He cannot ever reach the point where he's an absolute on one side or absolute on the other. But he shows him how to defend against it, which takes a great deal of inner strength. You can't do it if you just can't tap into yourself at that level and say, I'm going to stop you, and I am going to give you that. This is a form of lightning judo, where you take everything that's coming at you and you're returning it to the person, possibly in a stronger form. And because of his inner strength of, I've gone through all of these trials, I am still an honorable man. I am a person that my uncle is proud of. I don't care if my father's not proud of me. My father's a madman. He has treated me with abuse since the day I was born. But this man, who actually did raise me, loves me. He says I am an honorable man, and I am. And that was his moment where he realized, okay, I don't want that power. but I can send it back to you. I think bending in the series is approached really on many spiritual levels as being perfection of self. You know, in one fashion or another, the truly powerful individuals we've seen in the series are approached as this is spiritual enlightenment or this is spiritual madness.
Yeah, because remember that scene where Tenzin's trying to teach Korra how to
The air dance.
the air dance through the thing.
Yeah.
That is
I thought that was a great scene, by the way.
be the leader. And because you really have to let yourself go, and that was what he was trying to teach
For
her.
her, everything had been easy up to that point. She was
Yeah.
such a great natural bender, and she reached that one point where she couldn't do it.
She couldn't.
She was
Kind of blessed
walking
at
herself
first,
from it.
Yeah.
As being naturally talented. When you're naturally talented, you don't learn
You don't
until
have
you're
to.
much older
Right.
that you need to try.
You learn focus for your talents along the way. But that was the one thing that she really could never get the grasp on. So she decides she's going to take her usual approach to everything and power right through them.
Right.
And she gets knocked the hell in back.
Yep.
And she blew it up, yes. That's an irreplaceable. Oops.
Yeah, but that's definitely a good point though about the spiritual enlightenment. How you look at the Fire Lord in the first series and Azula, and
But
they're
they
this
had their
crazy.
clarity, but they were completely insane. They
Yeah.
had spiritual clarity. They knew where they wanted to be and how they were going to get there.
And then you had the White Lotus people, and they had an amount of like Boomy was kind of like borderline crazy, but
Oh, he
still.
was insane, but he was kind of insane. He
Yes.
was the fun insane. I know I'm crazy, but I'm not going to hurt anybody with it. I'm just going to have fun with it. This is the crazy I want to be in my old age. Of course, at the age of 112 or so, I think we're forgiven the erratic behavior.
And then when you're old, you can do whatever.
Especially when you outfight everybody that's a quarter of your age at that point. But you had a really a great bunch in the White Lotus when you brought them up. They're all spiritual men. They've all reached a certain point where they've realized these are the tragedies in our life. We've gotten past them. These are our accomplishments. Not all your accomplishments, because Uncle Iroh was a perfect example of this. He was proud that he had conquered Ba Sing Se, that he had broken through the wall that no one else had before or after ever gotten through. But he was also very, what was the word I'm looking for? He regretted it because he had proven that it could be done. And so people would continue to try to do it. But he was well known as the Dragon of the East because he did this thing. And of course he could spit fire, which I always thought that's a great scene. Let me show you why I am the Dragon of the East. Definitely. But he had all these tragedies and he had gotten past them. He had reached spiritual enlightenment because he had discovered how to do lightning. And you had, I think it was Sokka's father was one of them too.
Yeah, it wasn't just benders.
And you had the waterbender general from the North Pole, that started off as a very unlikable character. Then he ends up as the step-grandfather. And you have him who is supposed to be one of the most skillful benders in the world. And all these men who had tragedies in their life, they had gotten past them and they had reached a certain point where you have that clarity of purpose, you have that clarity of being. You know why you're supposed to be where you are and what you have to do next. On the other side of the scale, like you mentioned though, is Azula and Ozai, who they were insane, they wanted power. And in Azula's case, she was completely powerless. All of the people that had been around her for the longest time, at least 3 of them had really betrayed her in some point or another. And then she started sending everybody away, so she was left without anything. It was just her alone at the end. That's a self-defeating process right there.
Her breakdown is really like one of the greatest things I've seen because for 2 2/3 of a season, she is a terrifyingly perfectionist mastermind. And then from like 4 episodes, you see her completely break down into a little girl.
I think it was when her best friends actually decided, you're getting too much.
That and actually, it was that and the fact that Dad left her at home.
Didn't trust her anymore.
Didn't trust her anymore. I said, I'm going to get, you have this title now, but it's meaningless. So you're just going to sit here. You can do nothing.
I'm going to conquer the world. So
Exactly.
see ya.
Yes.
Yes. You take care of the lands that we no longer have to conquer.
Right.
I'm going to conquer the rest of the world and be the greatest, Fire Lord in history. See ya.
So,
Her spiral into madness, though, is very well done. Even though it only took 4 or 5 episodes. So we do see a foreshadowing earlier on.
Oh, yeah.
On occasions, she'll give that glance. It scares everybody to kisses.
so Katara and Aang had 3 kids. So Aang was the only airbender, but then one of his children was an airbender. And then all of his children were airbenders.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with Elena. Can Tenzin repopulate the world with airbenders?
But I think that will be the start of it. Because, 3 airbending kids, okay, they all...
3 females, too.
Yeah.
Because wasn't the new one...
Monkeys.
So it's 2 boys and 2
Yeah,
girls.
boys now.
Yeah.
So that means that they'll at least be able to actually, I'm sure at least half of them are going to be airbenders. And it's going to continue on that way. And yes, basically all the airbenders in the future are going to be related. But, that's what happens when there's a mass genocide. But I think that after a couple of generations, they'll reach a point where they're still much less than the other benders, but they'll be at a point where they can...
Because with Tenzin and his wife, they have shown that you don't need to have 2 bender parents. And with the 2 brothers, they have shown that, indeed, you can have 2 brothers who are completely different benders in the same family with mother and father, who might be from different nations.
I'm gonna slightly differentiate on that. One, with Pema, you kind of see that you can follow the philosophy without necessarily being a bender itself. 2, originally all of the air nomads were benders. There were never that many to begin with, but every single air nomad was a bender because they had that spiritual connection to begin with.
It was noted at one point that there were only, if anything, there might have been 2, at most, maybe 3,000. But in the various temples, there was only hundreds of them. So it was quite easy for them to find these localized points and wipe them out.
Yeah, there weren't that many to begin with. So it wasn't like there was a huge number to begin with. And then when you start bringing in some different people who want to take that philosophy. Now, if you notice, they do have a lot of acolytes who are there. They're not benders, but they still follow that airbending kind of way.
Yeah, the
So,
guards and monks.
yeah, so you have your monks there who actually do follow that philosophy. And you still, and I think it probably won't be all related, but you'll start to see pairings off of people who end up marrying out of side family. They'll start branching out. And you'll start seeing a little bit more of a mix at
It'll
this point in
take,
time.
scientifically speaking, it should take about 2 to 250 years of constant breeding for them to reach a point where they can actually marry back into each other.
Okay.
Genetically speaking, that might be the point where they won't start, producing babies with 3 eyes.
Or that hospital is.
There you go.
Yeah. So,
I do like that they've shown in the series that you can have the 2 brothers who was the same exact parents. They weren't different mother or different father. But since the 2 parents were from different nations, it could indeed produce children that were of one or the other, which gives you hope for the airbenders.
right.
So somewhere out there, they could be an entire, village full of people who weren't benders at the time, but still had bender blood.
Or at least the capability of one.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sue?
I definitely think that Tenzin would keep on having babies, and
They're still
that's
young,
gonna be
yeah.
our airbender population.
I was,
Simple as that.
I was pretty worried at the couple episodes where it's like his family was in danger, and it's like we're gonna lose all the airbenders now. What is gonna happen?
It's really funny.
Yeah,
That
It's
point.
easier the second time around.
true.
It was the point when they got attacked on the island, and Mifong is babysitting them right before she has the baby, and she says to Tenzin, "Are you kidding? Without them, I would have been toast." Because they're the ones that fought off everybody. So
I
think-
love her. I think she's one of the best characters in the show.
I think
She's
they're gonna be
not
the
anything
combination.
like her mother, but she is still one of the best characters in the show. She's just that soul that she has seen horror in her life. She's been a cop for 40 years, give or take. And she's seen all these horrible things in her lifetime. Or I think closer to 30 years. My bad, sorry. And she learned all of her lessons. She took up her mother's specialized skills and she taught to other people. And she just went forward And you understand her point of view in a lot of ways because she has that inner strength that we came to love about Toph. Toph was a disabled child. She was told for years that she couldn't do these things, but she could. She proved, she went out and showed, you know, I'm gonna help reconquer the world from the bad guys, Dad, Mom, see ya. And they lock her in a box where she can't feel anything outside. And she decides, you know what, you're not keeping me here. I'm going to break out of this box, which I think is literal and spiritual on many levels. And she breaks out of this metal box and beats the living shit out of the guys who kidnapped her. Because now she's the only existing metal bender to have ever existed.
Lane is probably she is a middle-aged boss. She runs the cops over there. She is the captain. And she's middle-aged, she's bad, and
In the series, which was like in episode 1, for example. So I'd really like to see more of her. I'd like to see what exactly causes her to have the personality that she does.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be important for them to do that, to show her backstory.
Yeah.
Because some people, like myself, didn't get to see the Last Airbender. So, you know, I am going to go back and watch it now because I have Netflix. But
36 hours.
for some people that don't, who won't pursue it, who are brand new to this franchise, because that's what it's becoming, it's a franchise.
Yeah.
That's going to be really important for storytelling, for them to show her background. So, because we are going to see more of her, and she's going to be very important to the story as it unfolds.
I think that the thing about Toph, as you said, you haven't seen much of Toph, but to understand Toph is the simple fact that she's born blind. She knows that she is a very powerful bender, but her parents coddle her. All they see is their blind little princess that obviously needs everything done for her. They're rich people, they're nobles to boot, so they think, well, we can give her a life where she'll never want for anything. Well, the one she really wanted was the trust to make her own way. So she's got that chip on her shoulder of, well, you know what? Screw you. I can do this for myself. And the few times that early on that Sokka or specifically Katara actually ran into a lot of problems with her over this, where Katara tried to treat her not as one of the guys, but as someone she needed to take care of. Because that is Katara's mindset. I want to be a mom. I want to take care of people. I'm a healer. And that is, you know, her thing. But when she tried it with Toph pretty much beat her up above the head and shoulders verbally for trying to coddle her. And that's Toph's chip on the shoulder.
which leads to one of two instances in the original series of mud wrestling.
I'm not going to say anything about this specific guy. And there is no good answer for me to reply to that at this point. Especially since both of the individuals involved in said mud wrestling were under the age of 16.
This is true.
So we're getting close to the point where I was going to open it up to audience questions. So I think we'll do that now, and then we'll come back to get kind of a final.
I know, Lydia, that's over there. Actually, you had yours up first. But, you know, if you want to give it up to him, go ahead.
You guys talk about how important it is to tell the story. I think it's important to remember that what we want as viewers, as the audience for the story so far, and what's actually important to the story, it's not up to us. That may not be important. Link's backstory may be like Shepard's book's backstory, but we never get to know it. There's other stories going on that superseded immigrants. And one of the things that I liked about the original series that I see again is that they see all of these possible plot points along the back, and they don't know which one of them is going to come.
It is really what they did with Uncle Iroh. We never actually saw Iroh. Sorry, my bad.
You know, people are getting flashbacks.
Mea culpa, mea culpa. It
The
is,
other thing I wanted to say is
for him, one of the things was,
about them being different. I think that they have to see the shit happen. Nobody is on top because she wasn't a strong person. Nobody is going to talk to her. Nobody is going to treat her like anyone's little princess. She's going to keep her butt. And I think, like, I can see how that shit was passed from one person to another.
I Like how she would develop that personality sort of based on her mother's story, like making sure that what happened in childhood didn't happen to her.
I can see how helpful this is.
I think that same strength of will was definitely passed along, but I don't think that anyone in their lifetime would ever have coddled May. I do seriously think that she has more of a, I won't let them do this because they did it to my mother already. Kind of attitude.
This is a bit of a question. In Avatar, you have a very clear enemy, you have a very clear hero, and when Aang is fighting, he's very much a weaponized person. He's a weapon. He's a very happy-go-lucky weapon. He's a weapon. And he's really good at what he does. And in Korra, we are presented with much more systemic problems. And Korra is not very well suited to them until this episode in Japan, and then she can be socially productive again by causing lots of property damage. So my question is, why does Korra need to have a hero, much less the Avatar? Why are we calling the Avatar?
All right. I think one thing that you have to also note here is that Aang didn't want to be who he was.
Yes.
He didn't want to be what he was.
Yes.
Korra, on the other hand, has embraced it fully since the age of about 3 and gone forward with it, and she finds joy in this, where Aang had to come into a lot of wild emotions of, I have this great installed ethical background for me, and I know that my enemy, the thing that I am meant to defeat and bring balance back to the world. In Korra's position, she doesn't have that great overarching enemy. She needs someone that's a much earthier kind of villain, if you will.
I guess what I'm saying is that in Korra, it starts out being a fairly subtle narrative where a lot of the problems with Republic City she's incapable of solving, and I thought that was a very interesting thing, except that they got information that they brought out the substance, and all of a sudden she can fight and she can save the day, and I felt very let down by that.
I'm going to get into 2 points of that. One, there were systemic problems in the original series. Kyoshi created the Dai Li. 2, the reason why I think you probably get into problems of the equalists is because the equalists are hypocrites. They start saying, oh, we're going to say everybody's equal. When they get into power, they say the benders are below us. So they are doing specifically what they said they would not do.
They vilified them for the purposes of gaining power.
Exactly.
But the benders do the same thing though, too, to the non-benders. They're below them.
Some of them do that, some of them don't. It kind of depends on the different person. And I would say that for non-benders as well. But you see a systemic entry of the equalists saying that we're different from what the regular people are offering. And then when you actually get them into power, they say no, we're not. So
equalities are bad.
yes, exactly.
Oh wow, look at the hands now.
Returning to the question of the restoration of the Airbenders, this is where I think the writers on the original series kind of let us down for 2 reasons. One, we're told through all 3 seasons of the original that Aang's mission is to restore balance to the world. They can't restore balance to the world without restoring the Airbenders, right? Because they're part of that balance. And secondly, at the end of the 3rd season, Aang has the power to manipulate people's energy, which means he can make his own Airbenders. He doesn't need to reproduce.
Originally, Aang only could take bending away. It's not until you get to Korra in the end of the 1st season that you start seeing people restore bending.
Oh, we only see it.
Yeah,
I don't think he actually learned how to put it back.
How can you know?
You got a 30-year gap.
It's not.
No idea.
Well, he did
You would
tell
have
us
heard
how
somebody say
Okay.
the Avatar restored my bending or gave me bending.
It was Aang who told her how to do this. So we have to consider the idea that someplace in that 20, 30-year gap,
That he learned.
I don't think-
figured it out on his own, but didn't tell anybody because that is something that you could so easily abuse.
I disagree. I think there's no reason not to think that if Aang knows how to manipulate energy in such a way that he can remove bending, it stands to reason he can manipulate
We
the
have also
energy
been shown.
to give it. I mean, he's got that ultimate bending ability at that point after his encounter with the lion turtle, and so it's not an unreasonable extrapolation to think that
One of the
he's out of
things we
possession
see though
of
in the
it.
series is the idea that just because you can do something, you might not should do it. Maybe you shouldn't do it.
But again, it goes back to his repeatedly stated mission of
Well,
restoring
he
balance.
did find a way to do it though. He did find a way to bring it back to the world because he had fallen in love with a woman and they had kids. And that is maybe slower than
Are
your
we getting
method.
to the Jedi answer where the
Yeah,
balance
that's,
is one?
yeah, there might not. We might have to agree to disagree on this. Actually, you know,
Actually,
yeah.
Okay.
randomly.
Yeah, I'll change the subject.
Yeah.
I had a couple questions. The first one was the high-level techniques. In the first series, lightning, metal bending, and blood bending were all considered high-level or forbidden techniques. With the exception of
Metal bending actually didn't exist yet.
well, towards the end it did. But what I'm saying is, with the exception of metal bending, because I know it is addressed in the comics, The Promise, with the exception of metal bending, don't you think that in Korra there seem to be a lot more people using these high-level techniques as part of everyday life?
Because
For
once you've
instance,
let
the
cat
power
out of
plant.
the bag, you can't put it back in.
Correct, but like, I just feel that like, for some reason, it just exploded. So there were way too many people using these high-level techniques, and it sort of made it seem like it was just the average, everyday Joe Schmo bender could use these techniques. Whereas in the original series, it was special.
I think what you start to see is that you start to see a lot of communication, like almost the way you can have like technology forming. When you have these, especially, we're only looking at a small citywide, so we don't even know if everybody in the entire world is doing these advanced techniques to begin with. And two, when you have like probably even on certain schools, people that are actually teaching these techniques and be able to do that. So you actually, when you start teaching and learning, then showing off these techniques, you're gonna have a lot more people doing it. I'd say it's a lot more like to having like advanced technology, almost in the way like a plasma screen or a TV. When you first originally started off, it was really rare to anybody see this. And as the time progressed, you see a lot more people getting into it because it's becoming a lot more affordable. And a lot more world from Aang to Korra, the techniques advanced from the Avatar world from Aang to Korra as well.
Information dissemination in the universe definitely has a play in it. Also, we've seen something that isn't a bending form, but is of equal note, the idea of the chi benders, which in the original series, we only ever heard of one. And she was counted as a very rare individual. That was something that, until that point, the Avatar hadn't even heard of ever. It had to be explained to him when he first encountered it.
Blue shirt in the back.
In the original series, Aang has a really hard time with earthbending because it's the natural opposite to air. And so I'm wondering if you guys have any idea as to why Korra learned firebending so easily. Because when you come in, she has already mastered it at the grand old age of like 5.
Tenzin actually explains it at one point.
Oh, okay.
Because of her nature, where it's shown when she tries to air dance for the first time through the spinners, she goes into it just like a semi going through a wall. She tries to barrel her way through it like she's done with everything else in her lifetime, because it's always worked for her. She's got that kind of personality, and she's got enough raw talent that it happens. But when she tries it with airbending, she's defeated, because airbending has always been pointed at as being spiritual enlightenment. You have to have a certain, it's not just power that you're born with. You need that level of, I'm good with myself to this point and I understand myself.
It can also be just, Aang also had some personality differences with earthbending. Earth has always been, toughening up, being physically strong. And I think that I know that he is physically strong, but I think that the two personality opposites between Aang and Korra are that Aang had to toughen up and take his position as Avatar, and Korra had to loosen her grip on it. And I think that was why they had the opposite level.
I almost almost asked a question related to it, but she's definitely had issues with like the spirituality side of her, and I think that's why was tough with the airbending, which was very opposite of Aang, which I think made her a great character. Like they were so different. You know, one was male, one was female.
And Aang was a much more spiritual being, whereas Korra is much more physical.
Discovered all this at the age
No.
of 12 after living as a monk.
Yes.
Purple shirt in the front.
Thanks a lot. Going a little bit off of the question about Zeppelins and systematic inequalities of the public city and all that. It seems to me there's some strong differences between the way the first series ends, politically speaking, and the way the second series ends. The problem that we're facing in the first series, again, politically, is that you have this one nation that's invading all of the other nations, and the result is the sort of resolution is the Avatar comes back, masters all four elements, brings some sort of political balance to these nations, and again, the interstitial comic sets up a public city, and UN community thing. And then, so there is actually some political resolution to that conflict. In the second series, while we do have Amon as one particular charismatic leader revealed to be a fraud.
The series would be over after one season, and they wouldn't have anything to continue with it, so it would just be like, oh, we solved a major conflict, and now we're going to add a bunch of filler. So they had to leave that unresolved in order for the series to end.
And I think what happened too was that this first season that we saw was our opportunity to see who the main players were, what they were, what their motivations were, and now we're going to get into the story when this new series starts. I really believe that's what's going to happen. And this initial was just for the laying ground. It wasn't meant to show any resolution.
Okay, yeah, let's.
He's wanted to ask a question for a while now.
You next.
So in the real world, we see the group Anonymous, which is kind of this propaganda group that spreads messages, and it's not known as any one person. It's known as more of a symbol with the Guy Fawkes mask, and we see it as kind of all powerful in a way.
That way, actually.
What?
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of it from the Guy Fawkes mask.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of see them as all powerful, kind of like a WikiLeaks type thing, where they get this information or they share this information or they have this idea that no one really knows how they got it or how they're abusing their power, or how they're doing all this hacking and whatnot. And then we see Amon, who is kind of, I think of him as kind of the Anonymous of the Avatar world, where he is more of a centralized individual, but still he has his mask as a symbol. He's not any one person. And while people have tried to take him down, they have failed. He has always had the upper hand, and he has this technology, this power that nobody else has seen, nobody else has any idea about. How do you think of the two and compare and contrast the two in the real world and the Korra world?
It's actually kind of a hard question there.
The thing about the Anonymous, though, is that
You've stumped the panel. We give up. Surrender.
There's always one. There's always one.
I think it's really interesting, though, is that because that the Amon has one mask as a system, you know that there is a person called Amon. You don't know who specifically Anonymous is. You only have these people dressed in that Guy Fawkes mask, per se. But you know that there is a symbol of Amon. You know that there is actually a specific person of Amon. And I see what you're talking about with the idea of them underground, that kind of thing, but they have a figurehead. They have a spokesperson
In a
that
public
is.
forum.
Yes, they have a specific person in the voice and a spokesperson that is Amon, that is in this mess, that he only knows how to take away this bending. With the Anonymous grouping, you know what it is that they're far more varied because they don't have a specific leader.
They are
or
faceless, which
Yes.
actually makes them more sinister.
Right.
When you think about it. They're a much more sinister organization, if they even are an organization.
I would be
depending on which
interested
one
to
you talk
see what happens to the Equalists, especially with the lieutenant. Now that you don't actually have Amon
about. I think
anymore,
they're going to be a lot more.
I think they're a lot more threatening as a unit for those who are hard mind
Definitely
to
gonna be
stay
harder to
put.
squash down.
That would actually be a lot more terrifying, and that would be a lot more like Anonymous when it actually gets done to next season.
You know, in a comparison to real life, what about the Al Qaeda?
That's a good one.
It took us 10 years to
That's a
find the
good
guy in charge. So
That's a
there
good
you go.
Right.
And we have the single largest and most intricate and well-trained intelligence organizations in the world.
And we
It took us 10 years
10
to
years.
catch up to them.
You
This nice lady over here has been very quiet
Yeah.
in the last 10 minutes in the
hold
steampunk
on.
outfit.
I actually think he was going to be next, though.
Oh, he's actually,
He's answering.
she's actually been waiting 10 minutes now.
Okay. What were we talking about?
Maybe Cynthia.
Oh, it was going back to when he was talking about how Aang could have repopulated the Airbenders. It was going to the who's to say who deserves that power to just have airbending? You know, are you gonna give
You
it
can't
to
just step up and go, hey, who wants to be an airbender?
Yeah.
Not really the best way to approach that.
Yeah.
God only knows who you get. I can be a nice person for 5 minutes.
Yeah, but repopulating the airbenders, how would you do that? Have children? How
Kids.
Yeah, exactly. How do you choose which people get to be airbenders and which don't? Like, using a random number generator,
Well,
obviously.
I'm sorry, but that's storytelling. You come up with a system to do it.
Still, I think they
having children who are airbenders is just as unpredictable. You know?
There will always be something in the mix that could go backfire on you.
Right.
But I think approaching a bunch of strangers and saying, I can give you the equivalent of a nuclear weapon in your pocket.
I don't.
How about, repopulating the world for me?
I don't
And
imagine
he's not gonna
any.
have enough children to just repopulate.
Okay, let's do 2 more questions. Let's do him, and you were raising your hand a lot too.
So real quick, I want to respond to 2 things. First, that I think the big difference between Iman's group and Anonymous is that Iman has a paramilitary organization with guns, and Anonymous doesn't.
Guns, mecha, fast cars, and dirigibles.
So that's also that in my mind there is no similarity between solving something and resolving a narrative. I think those are extremely different, and I say that as a fan of Wire. Like those have nothing in common, and I don't think that we resolved any of the narrative that was depicted before. I was very disappointed with the ending. I think that throughout both seasons there is the Avatar is never a messianic figure. That's not how it's supposed to be. The Avatar is very much a weapon. That's what the Avatar's function is.
The one time in the original series when he is seen as a semi-messianic figure, it's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing. Right? They're not messianic and they're not meant to be. They're weapons. And
they're problem solvers. They're not weapons.
Right.
They're not just
They're
problem
not
solvers.
problem
There are
solvers.
so many
So what happens
instances
They're balanced
the
where the
writers
Avatar
of the
steps in
show-
and solves problems.
The writers of the show box themselves
Yeah.
into this
Not
corner
just
because you have Korra who's a warrior first and foremost. That's how she should train. And you have a systematic problem, which warriors are not very well equipped to use. And so what happens as you get through the show is eventually they just break up the Zeppelins and then she can fight and do her thing. But I'm not convinced, and I'm worried for the longevity of the show that Korra is the right person to be following in this very large.
Well, this just gives her room to grow. And I think that's what makes Avatar a great franchise, I'll call it that, is because they have shown that the characters do grow.
Did you still have a question?
Just comments and yes. If Aang or the Avatar could restore bending, what would stop him from making other avatars?
That's good.
The physical world was created by a contract between the spirit world.
Hey, this is gonna have to be our last question.
Yeah, and would that Avatar have the same spiritual connections, and even could anyone except the person of the Avatar lineage possess that power, or would creating a new Avatar create a new Avatar lineage, so eventually you could have like a band of Avatars?
I feel like we only saw Aang do that as a spirit. Did he have that power in real life?
I think the difference here would be that even if he was able to do that and give someone 4 different types of bending, I think that even if they could control all 4 types, they would not have any connection to the past benders. So they would not, past airbender, the past avatars, sorry. Because like part of the Avatar's journey is to connect with his past lives. I think that it's possible to give someone bending, but I don't think it's possible to give someone a spiritual connection to past lives of somebody else. And so I think that even if he could make someone the Avatar in the physical sense of having all 4 types of bending, he could not connect the Avatar along the way.
It has been shown time and again.
Spirit world.
Right, and I think that's not what the community
Well, they're talking about season 2, since I was at San Diego and they did the Avatar panel. They're talking about, since the season left off with a cliffhanger, that mostly the second season, where Korra is still the Avatar, is going to focus on the spirit realm, actually.
Are they going to talk at all about, at this panel in San Diego, did they mention at all talking about like the leftover anti-benders at all?
Well, I wasn't really there. All I heard as much as it is. Because one thing is, it was almost a good 24-hour wait just to get into that panel. People stood in line until 1 o'clock in the morning to be at an 11 o'clock in the morning panel. So,
That next to having Robert Downey Jr. come in.
well, yeah, Iron Man 2 and the Avengers and stuff like that.
Let's real quick. Final thoughts.
They're saying somewhere between April and June.
I'm good with that. Hold on. We'll do final thoughts real quick. We still got like 3 minutes. Final thoughts, Elena? No?
I'm intrigued to see what the next season's gonna do, and I really hope that Chloe makes another season.
I've been hearing, I had friends at that panel, and they were saying it's going to be a mind bender. It's going to be one of those, it's going to be a season where you're just going to go, whoa.
I'm saying this is really exciting to see it.
Honestly, I love the series so far. I think it's a worthy successor to the original. My only complaint, if I've got any, is how rushed the last 2 episodes were. They tried to cram way too much into 2 episodes, but as I understand it, they weren't sure if the series was going to be a success. They wanted to get everything done in 13 episodes.
They didn't know that
They didn't know it was gonna be shit. Now they know
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.